Lebanese leader Hassan Nasrallah is dead. It is no longer a suspicion. It's not a report. It's been confirmed by Hezbollah themselves. And now a significant portion of all of the leadership of the Hezbollah group has been assassinated by Israel. And they are reeling right now, trying to figure out what they're going to do next and try to figure out what the region is going to do next and what's going to happen next. We have two great guests on today to really cover a whole spectrum of this. And that's Matthew Ho, former State Department official. You know him well. We have also got Larry Johnson, who I see is now popping in, former CIA analyst. And so we're going to cover this from every aspect here, because there are a lot of ramifications to go on to this. And fellas, first of all, just really appreciate you guys joining us on a Saturday afternoon. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for the invite.
Well, listen, okay, we have having some issues there. By the way, sorry, with Larry's got some issues with his internet connection, and he's trying to find a way to make his phone work. And so that's why it's not quite the same as normal, but I'm
back.
Grateful. We're grateful for what you got.
Yeah.
Okay, so we now have absolute confirmation that Hassan Nasrallah is dead, and that is really, really, I think, something, at least speaking for myself, that caught me totally off guard. I did not expect Israel to take that move, even though they'd been taking out lots of his lieutenants and some of the other commanding generals. It caught me off guard. And first of all, I just kind of wonder what your guys' thoughts are on this precedent smashing move by Israel to take out the leader in such a dramatic fashion. Matt, you first.
Well, it was dramatic. It made me think of the scene from The Godfather, the famous baptism scene, where he's standing up there and he's renouncing evil at the same time as his people are going out and carrying out evil. And we essentially had that occur yesterday with Benjamin Netanyahu at the United Nations, opening with just remarks about how Israel's for peace, he is for peace, on and on and on. At the same time, these strikes were on the verge of being carried out. So the theater of it, the drama of it, certainly, if people were like me and you watched, say, Al Jazeera last night, you could see just the constant strike after strike, illuminating the Beirut skyline, reminded me very much, of 20 years ago with Baghdad. But certainly I think a lot of us were taken off guard by it, Danny, because it just seems so untoward and it just seems so out of bounds. But we're foolish then, right? Because they just did this. The Israelis just did this in July when they assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. So the idea that they are going to respect any bounds, that they're gonna keep it within some type of standard that we might be expecting, we're fools for even thinking that, because it's based upon everything the Israelis have done up to this point, including the last couple of days. But certainly, this was in the best American example of shock and awe. But we also have to remember what comes after shock and awe. And so anyone who's celebrating and thinking this is the end of it, like the vice president in her statement today, seemed to be, you're being very ahistorical.
And Larry, before I ask you a question, I want to bring that up because I thought it was so. Matt, you called it theater, where Netanyahu goes to the UN knowing full well what's about to come in and launches off with this statement.
This war can come to an end now. All that has to happen is for Hamas to surrender, lay down its arms, and release all the hostages. But if they don't, we will fight until we achieve victory, total victory. There is no substitute for it.
So actually, Gary, sorry, I set you up there wrong. I wanted you to play that one where he said the piece that Matt had referred to there that we had a second ago.
And here's the truth. Israel seeks peace. Israel yearns for peace. Israel has made peace and will make peace again.
So he is pounding on his lectern. We are for peace and we will make peace again. Physically pounded on the lectern as they were getting ready to push the button for rockets to just decimate the center part of Beirut. What do you make of that? I can't hear you, Larry. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yep.
Here's the problem. Israel has been trying to kill its way to peace for the last 60 years, and it's failed. They thought if we go out and kill the Black September organization that was responsible for the attack on Israeli athletes in the 1972 Munich Olympics, that would fix the problem. Well, it didn't. In fact, the Israelis ended up killing people in their quest for revenge. And that was followed, 32 years ago. They killed the leader of Hezbollah. Only at that time, it wasn't Nasrallah. Nasrallah was a young guy who then eulogized that the former general secretary of Hezbollah. And what the Israelis were publishing then was, oh, we've eliminated now the threat of Hezbollah. We killed the head guy. They don't understand that this is first and foremost a religious movement, a movement where the people are people of deep faith, that their life is not tied to this world. They believe in an eternity. They believe in a paradise, and they believe that while they prefer to live, if they die, it is the will of God. And the Israelis just simply don't understand that. And so what they have done is they have now basically taken a small fire that was burning, they've thrown gasoline and gunpowder on it. And this thing's going to blow up and blow up big.
Well, and now, Gary, now, sorry, I got that out of order, but that one you previously showed there, because I think that's really important for what may be coming next. And if you could play that one about the Hamas.
This war can come to an end now. All that has to happen is for Hamas to surrender, lay down its arms, and release all the hostages. But if they don't, we will fight until we achieve victory, total victory. There is no substitute for it.
So, I think actually there is a substitute for it, or at least an alternative. It could be diplomacy, which is like a ceasefire, which a lot of people have been trying to get for the long time. And it's actually been, categorically rejected here. So, Matt, let me ask you this. It's been close to a year now. We're closing in on the year anniversary of this war here that he's talking about getting to total victory. They have launched from north to south, from Gaza all the way down to Rafah and to the gates down there in front of Egypt. And they have killed tens of thousands of people, but they don't seem to be any closer to an end. And now then they're talking about, again, moving all the hundreds of thousands of people out of Gaza City in the north and trying again. Can he achieve a total victory?
Not in any sense that the three of us or anyone who's watching or anyone who has a, a degree of sanity would agree as, excuse me. Anyone with a degree of sanity or a brain in their head would understand as victory. There is no victory in this. There's only war. But Israel, Netanyahu exemplifying Israel right now, Israel has, since its existence, always lived in a state of war. They live in a house of war, if you will. And this idea that there is ever going to be a peace for Israel is at odds with what and who Israel is. I think if there ever was a peace, Israel would cease to exist. Israel needs enemies to prove its own self, to validate its own self, to receive the support from the Americans that keep it afloat. If people want to read a really great analysis on Israel's future, mid and long term, I urge you to go to Moody's credit rating agency and read their analysis they put out 2 days ago, where they further downgraded Israel in terms of it's still an investment grade, but it's barely an investment grade, and it's only because of the Americans. But their analysis of all this is really terrific. But if they do not have this constant state of war, they don't have this constant state of emergency. It is then, of course, it divorces themselves from their history, their founding, and in particular, the violence. The violence is so key, I think, to understanding Israel, how it was founded, how it was formed, how it established itself, how it maintained itself. This type of sheer brutal violence, a true battle of good versus evil, a Manichaean struggle, us versus them, humans versus subhumans, because they go that far with it. And so I don't think the Israelis have any idea of what peace actually looks like. It's either constant warfare or an occupation with punitive measures continually doled out. And I think that's essentially what we're looking at here. The Israelis, as long as they have the Americans behind them, can continue to do this for as long as they want.
I want to read you something here. This is just released not long ago by the White House, specifically by the Vice President. Because the question I want to go to next, right off the top, is what can we expect next? What do we think is going to next happen? And I think one of you just mentioned this, but here's what allegedly the Vice President released herself. Hassan Nasrallah was a terrorist with American blood on his hands. Across decades, his leadership from Hezbollah destabilized the Middle East and led to the killing of countless innocent people in Lebanon, Israel, Syria, and around the world today. Hezbollah's victims have a measure of justice. I have unwavering commitment to the security of Israel. I will always support Israel's right to defend itself against Iran and Iran-backed terror groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. This sounds to me like what's next is who's next on the target list, and it doesn't sound like it's about to end. What do you think, Larry?
Yeah, no, Israel's gonna continue trying to kill and get away with it as much as possible. You know what the vice president said is just it's a pack of lies. Number one, the accusation of Hamas as this massive terrorist organization, and I think we've talked about this previously. All people have to do is go to the website of the Israeli Foreign Ministry, where they list every act of what they call Palestinian violence, excluding October 7th, every act since 2000, August of 2000. And what you discover is that Hamas is barely active as, quote, a terrorist organization, and that the vast majority of attacks attributed to it fall more in the category of what I'd call personal violence, of one person taking revenge out on another. And same for Hezbollah. I mean, the notion that Hezbollah is some massive terrorist organization killing Americans right and left, again, go look at the State Department's annual reports. The numbers don't back it up. Yet what Israel's objective here is to start a war with Iran. They genuinely believe all they've got to do is go in and drop some bombs, maybe a nuke or two, and Iran's going to go away as a problem, and Israel will be safe forever. That's where they're headed with this. And I fear with these cretins that we have right now in charge of the government, and they're aided and abetted by Republicans as well, the likes of Lindsey Graham. We're going to get embroiled in a world war, and Israel will drag us into it.
Now, Matt, going back to your State Department roots here, apparently the European Union has been just pleading for a ceasefire with Hamas. I'm sorry, with Israel, not just with the Hamas, which the U.S. has been pointlessly in vain trying to get done. But the European Union had said, hey, let's get a ceasefire with this Hezbollah situation before it blows out of control. And according to ABC News, Gary, if you could toss that one up on the screen here, according to ABC News, that's just been met with complete and utter failure. It says Israel is preparing for a limited ground incursion into Lebanon, according to a U.S. official. Israel has rejected a ceasefire proposal from the European Union, even a short one, according to the official, and have not maintained communication with the Biden administration. When you saw, you haven't actually seen it yet, sorry, we got a clip coming up where we're going to show the Secretary of Defense saying that we didn't know anything about this. We didn't know it was coming. We saw, I guess yesterday, Kirby say the same thing. We didn't know anything about this. We hadn't heard anything about this. That's what we said about the pager situation. So it looks like they are literally doing everything they want to as we give them $8.7 billion more dollars. And what does that tell you, Matt, that Israel's objective is in this conflict?
Well, their objective, and just to add on to a point that Larry's making about these organizations, Hezbollah, Hamas, and that they are not terrorist organizations in the way that they are demeaned as such. And they're no more terrorists than state actors are when they kill civilians. But for most people, I think most Americans have no idea how Hezbollah was formed. Most Americans probably believe Hezbollah was formed because a bunch of guys were sitting around reading old books and they just hate Jews, and this is what they came up with. When the reality is Hezbollah was formed in 1982 following Israel's invasion of Lebanon. And so not understanding that key aspect of where Hezbollah comes from, and why they have the support of so many within Lebanon, so many within the region and around the world. If you don't understand those basic realities about these organizations, you'll never have a good grasp of what's actually occurring here, or you'll live in a fantastical world where you think, as kind of Larry was saying earlier, this idea that you can kill yourself to victory. We just have to bomb everybody on the org chart and then we win. And so the where's this go to with Israel, though, is they continue to do what they want because there is no leverage that can be put on them. There's no penalties for them, and they see a political gain for them. You look at the polling in Israel for Netanyahu, polling this week before Nasrallah was killed, before these massive strikes in Beirut that have killed God knows how many civilians. I mean, they dropped 170,000 pounds of bombs. Right in that densely 700,000 people live there. They dropped 170,000 pounds of bombs. We won't know for a long time how many people were killed. But for Netanyahu, the gain, even though Israel's the IDF apparently is exhausted, its economy, they are bleeding out. You've got one retired general in the IDF after another saying, we are killing ourselves here. We are eating ourselves alive. We are going to collapse, and then, of course, the political chaos. But you look at the polling, and Netanyahu is doing quite well. Polling this week, again, before the assassination of Nasrallah, Netanyahu was the Likud party was looking to get 25 or 26 seats in the Knesset, which is up over the 19 or 20 that they were projecting a few months ago for them. So the benefit to Netanyahu is clear. This is how he maintains power. This is how he expands power. And of course, too, I think we should also recognize, getting back to this idea of theater, maybe one of the reasons why this occurs now, not the only reason, but one of the reasons, is because next week is the anniversary of October 7th. And rather than having to face up to that failure, rather than having to face up to how the Israeli government killed so many of their own people, how no one has really been held accountable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you can offer up Nasrallah's head on a plate in substitution for having to actually address what truly happened on October 7th.
Wow, that's really interesting, especially when you think about the timing of when this happened. I'm going to show you a clip and staying in the theme of what's next or what may be next. I'm going to play you a clip of what Netanyahu said at his UN speech just before this assassination strike took place. But I want to kind of set it in the context. So in just the last number of months, Israel has assassinated people in Tehran, in the capital city of Iran, during a presidential inauguration. They have leveled a diplomatic compound in Syria. They have assassinated a number of Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon, even before this current spate here. And they have sent military jets to destroy areas even in Yemen. So literally all over the Middle East, you have Israel physically attacking lots of targets and killing people, breaking all kinds of norms. And we're going to talk about that precedent setting in a second, because I don't want to lose the ball on that one. That's a really important one. But first of all, in that context, here's what Netanyahu said at that UN speech.
I have a message for the tyrants of Tehran. If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach. And that's true of the entire Middle East.
And Larry, Gary, sorry, if you could play that next one there, where he's talking about the Iranian nuclear weapons issue.
Iran now seeks to weaponize its nuclear program for the sake of the peace and security of all your countries. for the sake of the peace and security of the entire world. We must not let that happen. And I assure you, Israel will do everything in its power to make sure it doesn't happen.
Okay, so, and I'm going to want both of your opinions on this one. Let's start with you, Larry, because he's really sounding, again, knowing that this was right on the cusp of the attack that was coming in to take out Nasrallah. It sounds like he is setting his next sights squarely on Tehran and wants to go after it no matter what. So he's coming up with this excuse of, well, they have a nuclear weapons program, and I need to protect the whole world to go after it. What do you say to that?
Well, no, he believes it, and I could introduce you to a number of Americans, Jews, who are fully convinced that all Israel has to do is just drop a nuke or two on Iran, and they'll just destroy Iran. It'll come apart at the seams. I mean, this is the same kind of ridiculous fantasy that infected the minds of top generals in World War II, who thought all they had to do was drop bombs on Germany, and that would bring the Germans to their knees, and that would end the war. Well, it didn't happen, and we've never had just one single example, even with the use of atomic bombs, that bring a war to a conclusion in quick order. So what Israel is embarked on is they believe their only way out is to start this war with Iran and get the United States involved. And what they're forgetting is that China and Russia have exercises with Iran for the last 5 years, naval exercises and some ground exercises. In addition, Russia is including basically a defense agreement with Iran. So any action like this by Israel is going to bring in Russia and China. And that's why I say that this is headed towards a global conflagration. And the sad irony about all of this, the terrorists, the ones who are engaged with the most terrorism are the Israelis. Mm-hmm. They've assassinated more, they've killed more women, they've killed more children, they've killed more civilians than Hamas and Hezbollah have in the last 40 years. Take every single victim of Hamas and Hezbollah, every act that you could attribute to them. And in just this last year, Israel has killed more women, more children, more civilians. And yet they want to hide behind the excuse of combating terrorism as they go about their murderous ways. I mean, it's sickening.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to set the context there, because I think we need to educate some people that only hear the sound bites in the headlines, because if you only listen to Netanyahu or some of our senior American officials, you think that Israel's a big victim here, and holy cow, they've got to do something because everyone's against them for no good reason. Matt, before I jump back over to you to get your view on that same issue there, I want to read one more piece from that White House release here, because it's interesting in a troubling way. She says, President Biden and I do not want to see conflict in the Middle East escalate into a broader regional war. We have been working on a diplomatic solution, blah, blah, blah. I'll just go on from there. But I just said earlier in this episode here how we have been begging for just a ceasefire in the Hamas issue, and we've been utterly rejected. Forget about the two-state solution, which we keep saying over and over and keep having him rejected in your face here. But now then we say we don't want a broader escalation. But if you believe what Larry's saying, and if reading between the lines what Netanyahu said, it looks to me like he's putting the crosshairs on Iran, and they may be next on the target list. What do you say?
Yeah, I think Harris's statement is just absolutely inane, but it's the same inanity that we have seen constantly for this last year. This idea that we are being really harsh on the Israelis, behind closed doors, like Biden really gave Netanyahu a talking to. And by the way, those 3 planes of C-17s, those 317s worth of weapons, they're going to show up a little late today. I hope you don't mind. I mean, like the how ludicrous this all is. And it all comes back to the propaganda, the theater, right? So one of the things you notice in that clip from the UN is that the Israelis packed the gallery. I watched a bunch of speeches from the UN this week. I don't think anyone put people in the gallery. The Israelis packed the gallery so that there'd be cheering and applause and whooping and hollering whenever they needed Netanyahu to say something. I'm sure maybe they had an applause sign. And of course, the joke is, of course, that those they packed the gallery with was the American Congress. But like,
Yeah.
which, right. I
Very
mean, but it's the propaganda. And this gets to the point that Larry brought up, right? And the same thing too with the Harris campaign, with the Biden White House, with the folks who populate our corporate media. They want to hear things that validate them. They want to hear proof that their convictions are true. So when you have these clips, when you have these statements, when you have these videos, it's just further solidifying the foundation of support that Netanyahu has within Israel, that Netanyahu has and Israel has within the United States and in parts of Europe as well. And it's why it's so important, this propaganda. When he speaks, he's not speaking to us. He couldn't care less that we're making fun of him right now, right? He's speaking to the people who already believe him, right? He's trying to shore up any who may be wavering in their faith. And that's what you see here. And then where this goes, God help us. But I really do think the Israelis have no plans. They have no strategy in terms of how it ends, that this is open-ended, and that they are pursuing what is long been called the iron wall policy, where it is really just punitive. This is just punitive. This is just vengeance. This is just violence for violence sake. We are tougher, we are stronger, and we have God behind us. And I think when you look at who makes up the governing possibilities within Israel, you only have two camps, and these are, I'm going to simplify it a bit, but really only two camps. And it's either the militarist nationalists or the extremely religious. And both of them are okay with the idea of a fortress Israel, as long, again, they have the United States backing them, as long as that fire hose of billions and billions of US dollars are available, as long as the on-demand, unconditioned guarantee of American backing of the Israeli government goes up forward, the fortress Israel can stand. And if you're a militant nationalist, that kind of goes with the way your life is. You've got to expand out. You got to create a buffer zone. You got to keep us safe from the barbarians. And then on the other side, if you're the religious side, well, isn't Fortress Israel, doesn't that just fit right in with your whole cosmic understanding of history? Isn't this what the Jewish people are supposed to be doing, fending themselves off against the entire world, essentially? So, the troubling thing is it fits their ideologies, it fits their outlooks, it fits what they want. And certainly this idea of, which is the one thing that the White House is terrified of, is that in the next 5 weeks, Israel will do something to precipitate that war with Iran, which of course would lose Harris the White House, because if we go to war with Iran, you're going to have $7 or $8 gallon gasoline overnight, and Harris doesn't win in November. But the thing for the Iranians, though, at this point, they understand that, but they also know that after the elections are over, I'm sure the Israelis may be willing to do whatever they want, because they feel they don't have to be careful with American politics, because at that point they'll have the complete buy-in of both parties.
Yeah, and that's a great headline, Gary, you just found, because it just makes it look more and more like they are in the crosshairs. So, but let me ask you, Larry, what could Israel do? They especially if they indeed go in on the ground, even a quote limited incursion into southern Lebanon, while they still have a lot of their force deployed in the Gaza Strip, and then what? They think that they could potentially somehow strike Iran too, that air power alone would get it. I mean, they can't launch out on this war unless the United States is physically with them. Or do you think that they may try anyway, and then if they get into trouble, then that will force the U.S. to come in on their side? How do you see that playing out?
Force the hands. So they're drunk with their own power, and they've been able in the United States, prominent Democrats that dared to speak up against them when they've suffered no repercussions. So they're really feeling that they can do about anything with impunity, and the United States is going to go along. And frankly, I don't think that that's necessarily an insane or a wild speculative idea on their part. I think they've got a lot of foundation for believing that, but then that becomes the problem. And in your own experience, and I'm sure Matt does, even in his experience overseas, there's no such thing as a limited military engagement. I mean, that's like saying, hey, I'm only going to get you a little pregnant. Sorry, It's either it's full preggers or it ain't. There's no in between here. And you know, I hate to use that analogy, but I mean that's really that's what we're talking about. And the Israelis, anybody that's dealt with them, they are the most arrogant, bad attitude group of people I've ever dealt with in the world. They're even worse than Egyptians. Okay. And the reason I focus on the attitude is you can't there's no humility, no sense of maybe I have something to learn from you. Oh, no, 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 no. They are the supreme experts. They know it all. And even if it blows up in their face, they're not going to admit, oh, that was a bad decision.
Yeah, and in fact, I did a show a week or so ago, looking back at the 2006 second Lebanon War, Israeli-Lebanon War, and one of the from the U.S. Command and General Staff College study, they concluded then, and they actually went back through a lot of the history from the 67 to the 73 wars. Also, it says Israel historically does not have a plan when it starts to use tactical actions. And it seems that is absolutely still in the case here. So, Matt, let me ask you this. What do you think, rather, that Netanyahu, especially if he's drunk with power, like he says, in these really cocky headlines that Gary just popped up there, that I think most of those are from today, that he may actually try to launch something against Iran? Or will he, do you think that he'll go and try to, quote, take care of moving Hezbollah north of the Litani River in the south? What do you think is going to be next?
I think, gosh, just as a point to what Larry was saying as well, with, and in this conversation about 06, I remember where I was in 06. I was in the Chow Hall. I mean, when I first heard about Israel's entrance into Lebanon, I was in the Chow Hall at 29 Palms, and we were a couple months away from going back to Iraq. And I remember thinking at the time, like, this is madness. What are they going to try and accomplish? I was also startled at how ebullient the American media was in covering that invasion. And I remember thinking to myself a little bit, on the petty and jealous side, like, we have two wars of our own. Why aren't you guys more excited about ours? But, I think what Israel will do is try and carry out these or continue these airstrikes into Lebanon, continue to do this punishment, to try and also score as much as they can against Hezbollah command and control, because it does have an effect. I mean, it's not a midterm or a long-term effect, but in a short term, it does have an effect when all your bosses get killed. In the mid and long term, of course, that's all that it doesn't matter so much. And if anything, it might be counterproductive, because you are essentially martyring these people, and you're essentially proving their life's mission, as well as bringing in other actors, whether it be in Lebanon itself, because Lebanon is fractured. How maybe this will unite the Lebanese people, that's a tall order. But you also see the possibility of, in the region, that this uniting the Arabs, the Turks, the Persians, the Sunnis, the Shias. It's not going to unite the Kurds. The Kurds are with the Israelis. But certainly what they're doing here. But I think in the short term, say in the next couple months, the emphasis will be on Lebanon, because that's a package that can be sold. That's a propaganda that can be sold. This is something, as we've seen from Vice President Harris and her campaign, that they are strongly supportive of. And it lays the groundwork one step after another to eventually get to your prize. The idea, I think, maybe in some of their heads in Israel and in the American heads as well, is that you're knocking off one proxy at a time, so that we can better fight. We don't have to worry so much about Hamas rockets coming out of Gaza. We don't have to worry so much about Hezbollah rockets coming out of the north. Now we have to worry about Yemen. But, that everyone's got a plan, as Mike Tyson says, until you get punched in the face. Right. And what happens next then, and you hear, where is this going to go? In terms of, the Israelis aren't the only ones who can make moves here. I don't think Iran is going to do anything to actually precipitate a war, but certainly there are lots of cadres of popular mobilization forces, of Shia fighters, who are extremely competent, lots of battlefield experience, for 2 decades of war in Syria and Iraq, both Syrian and Iraqi, as well as Yemeni fighters who defeated both Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who are supposedly on their way to Lebanon. So this idea of why hasn't Hezbollah responded, which I think is a question that a lot of people have, where are all these 150,000 missiles and rockets? Well, maybe they don't have that many. Maybe that's an option. Maybe their command and control is so jacked up right now, they're so stunned that they don't have a good way to actually fire them en masse and actually get an effect from them. Or maybe they're holding back. Maybe they're waiting. I think Larry is on board with me on this in terms of the axis of resistance. Because I think, Larry, I heard you use this phrase, rope-a-doping Israel, playing the long game, right? And certainly, I think that's where it might go. But just today though, and tomorrow, this crisis and what unfolds from it, I think a year from now, we're not going to be talking about the great ceasefire of 2024, 2025. We're going to be talking about what's occurring in terms of the continued killing and destruction and suffering and the open-endedness of it.
And Larry, I want to jump on one other thing that you said a second ago, because this next clip we're going to have here really, really illustrates the arrogance of the Israeli leader in what how he reads the current battlefield. So watch this part.
Far from being lambs led to the slaughter, Israel's soldiers have fought back with incredible courage and with heroic sacrifice. And I have another message for this assembly and for the world outside this hall. We are winning.
Man, that has echoes to me of General, what was his name? Not Austin. In 2013 in Afghanistan. What was that? Marine
Allen?
General Allen.
He was great.
This is what winning looks like. And we know that didn't work out quite well. So, Larry, looking at the tactical situation and now the expanding battlefield that Israel's building for itself, is he winning?
Well, no. And the biggest defeat is on the economic front. As Matt noted earlier, the downgrade of Israel's status as an investment opportunity is going to have long-term implications. But more importantly, their strategy, they're killing Nasrallah. Nasrallah was not a wild-eyed fanatic. He was a pragmatist. We may not like how he said some things, but he was a political pragmatist. And the Israelis are doing the same thing that we're seeing the United States do or trying to do to Russia, because we keep hearing over and over, oh, we get rid of Putin. Yeah, you get rid of Putin, and then what comes next? And so what comes next within Hezbollah is very likely not going to be somebody who says, oh, geez, these Israelis, boy, they're too tough. We better just give in to them and go away and die. No. You're going to get younger people who may be less mature, who may be less inclined to patiently sit back and take some punishment. They may be ready to dish it out regularly. And the other dynamic here that Netanyahu's failing to take into consideration, and you've touched on it on your show with Doug McGregor in particular, what's happening in the streets in Jordan, in Turkey, in Egypt in particular, those three countries, which have in the past been willing to try to accommodate Israel, are going to face tremendous domestic political pressure to get off their ass and do something, to fight back. The hot air balloon that's called Erdogan, he may have to come down to earth and actually, put some meat behind his mouth. Up to this point, he's just been, making idle threats, but we'll see.
I'm going to get in just a second here to the other half of this equation. We've talked about what Israel's doing and what may be next for them. I want to look in just a second about Hezbollah and Hamas and potentially Iran and what they may do as well. But I want to stop for just a second, kind of in a pivot point here, and ask a question here about precedents. Because this match, you said at the opening of the show here that it caught a lot of us off guard, and I admitted that I was one of them. But now then, first of all, the destruction of the Iranian embassy in Syria, was the first real big one. And then the one with the pagers, which was kind of indiscriminate, they didn't even know whose hands it was in. That went off, and we're talking thousands of people killed, some hospital workers, children, etc. People aren't worried too much about that. Collateral damage, no big deal. So now it's kind of becoming normalized. Now here, then this one, I think if Hezbollah, if Israel does this like earlier in the war, I think it's a shock, and there could be some response. But now then, the level keeps going up bit by bit, and now picking up acceleration. And so now then, here's something that heretofore would have been unthinkable, that you go after the political leader of the group that you're trying to maybe have a negotiation, because you're not, it's not like they have a state of war between the two sides. They've been low level shooting rockets back and forth, but now all of a sudden he's taken out. What does this do, Matt? We'll look at you first, precedence wise, because I'm just asking this question. Why can't Putin say, you know what? That's a pretty good idea. You know what? How about tomorrow morning we take out Zelensky and just destroy the presidential palace and take them all out with it? How are we going to say no to that then? Or is everybody else self-constrained? How do you see this?
Well, in terms of the U.S., I mean, we're such a state of double standard and hypocrisy, right? And so unsound and so unreasoned that we would have Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken and Admiral Kirby. They would have all the explanations for why the two situations are different, right? And this is what the problem is. They keep building these lies. They don't stand on any type of principle. They don't stand on any type of strategy, right? So we're just making things up as you go along to stick with the narrative, and you're basing your policy on your past narrative because your policy has to prove that narrative true, right? I mean, so then you have these situations where you get into these absurd double standards, and you in both sides then are falling in on you. So whether it's the fact that you've got a losing war in Ukraine that was always unwinnable, or you've got this hell in Gaza, this expansion of the war into Lebanon, and the threat of an explosive regional war, you can look at the Americans in Joe Biden's White House and say, you did this. This is your fault. This is your responsibility. They won't accept that, of course, and they certainly won't take the time or have the willingness or ability to have that introspection and understand why they got here. Right. So this constant doubling down, this constant reinforcing the narrative, this refusal to accept that things aren't working or that there are risks and dangers that blow out of proportion or blow completely out of proportion any of the benefits. So, yeah, I mean, the issues here with the precedent being set. There's also the precedent too in our own American experience that when you kill somebody, it doesn't win the war for you. We didn't kill Saddam Hussein, but we brought him out of power. We killed Zarqawi in 2006. We killed bin Laden in 2011. And just look at how it happens after that. We killed bin Laden in 2011, and I remember being in DC, and the people were celebrating outside the White House, and just like Israelis were celebrating last night in Tel Aviv. And the idea being, of course, that after bin Laden died, Al-Qaeda became its strongest. After bin Laden died is when Al-Qaeda grew into cadres of tens and tens of thousands, and they conquered territory and they took over major cities after he died. So to Larry's point, you get rid of Nasrallah, you get rid of all these longtime commanders. Who replaces them? And these guys aren't inexperienced. So you got rid of the 50, the 60, the 70-year-olds. And so essentially the 30, 40-year-olds come in. These are the guys that fought in Syria. These are the guys. And I think that is, if you're looking at what is the axis of resistance strategy, it's to right now, kind of a boxing type comparison. Israel has the reach, and they don't want their opponent to get in close. And that essentially, I think, is what the axis of resistance wants to do now or needs to do now, is for Hezbollah, and if they get assistance from the Syrians, the Iraqis, the Yemenis on the ground, and then they get continued support. And I think one of the things that Turkey might do is start providing support to Lebanon, right, to Hezbollah, in a way that you couldn't have imagined them doing that a year ago. Maybe that's what they'll do. Maybe that's how Erdogan will put some meat behind his words, so to speak. The other awful thing, if we really want to start thinking about what could happen, remember who Turkey utilized in Syria, right? They utilized ISIS. They utilized al-Nusra. You know what I mean? Like, so this idea of what may come from Israel may not just be a ground war with the Popular Mobilization Forces and Hezbollah, but also too, it's not too far of a fantasy to imagine somehow Sunni extremist jihadists getting involved in this as well, and then what comes from that. You know, and this is why I don't think Israel is really going to put their troops into southern Lebanon in a large number.
And Larry, I want to ask you a related question here. Let's look at the Hezbollah side of this. So based on your experience, and I know you dealt with this a lot when you're in the CIA, what do you anticipate the Hezbollah side to do? Because there is the, if not belief, certainly the aspirational hope among the Israeli people, and certainly some in the U.S. I've seen already comment on this, that because of they have decapitated this monster, that it's going to die on the vine, and that all these Hezbollah fighters are going to realize that there's no point in continuing to resist because we can't win. So let's stop shooting rockets across the border and let the Israeli people move back in and just move on and live to fight another day, I guess. How do you see them responding to this assassination of the top?
I have to go to Matt because Larry has to pop back in.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. So, Matt, there's that question to you. What do you think Hezbollah is going to do? Are they going to back down, or do they have the capacity to rise up, especially with this command and control system being wiped out?
Yeah, I think their best bet, as I was saying, is hopefully for Israel to invade. That sounds a little silly, right? But I think that is where they are strongest, potentially to repeat what occurred in 06, as well as why was Nasrallah, why did he have this role in Lebanon and throughout the region? Well, it's because effectively he's the only one who ever defeated the Israelis and made them and took back his land, right? So the Israelis occupied Lebanon for 18 years, all the way up to Beirut. And Hezbollah, they can claim they're the reason why Israel lost that occupation. They're the only people who only kicked Israel as an occupier. Right. So I think that's what they want essentially to do. But certainly what they can do, yeah, they lost their command and control right now. But that's all replaceable. That's all fixable. And I think a lot of it has to do with what do their allies want to do and how do they best avoid what Israel is best at, right? And how not to just respond in a manner that just goes right into Israel. And I imagine the Hezbollah is going analog right now. If you're in Lebanon, you're still walking around with a phone or anything like that, I would advise you to get rid of it.
Larry, let me ask you.
Sorry, let me apologize for the internet interruptions, but you know.
Oh, hey, I know you're dealing with the deal, and yeah, we'll take what we can get. You mentioned earlier here about when Nasrallah himself was elevated because of the assassination of the previous leader. What do you expect can happen here now then that he's gone? And because I haven't heard yet who the official replacement's going to be. What is that going to do to the organization, and what may happen next?
Well, they're going to name a new new general secretary, and he will make a speech, and he will indicate that they're going to continue the fight against Israel, and that they're going to be more energized to do this. That's what the Israelis are failing to appreciate. That they think that it's just killing one person, killing 10 people, killing 50 people, killing 1,000 people. No. You're going to have to kill them all. And Israel's not capable of that. And these people, the one sort of unexpected outcome from this entire, let's start with October 7th with Hamas, is in the past, there was not a natural affinity between Hamas and Hezbollah, in part because Hamas tended to be more oriented towards the Muslim Brothers. And the Hezbollah was a Shia organization. And so the Shia and Sunni didn't always necessarily mix. That division has subsided in great measure because both are being attacked by Israel. And it's like, you know what? Just like when the British decided to fight alongside the communist Soviets in World War II against the Nazis, you've got a similar phenomena taking place right now with Sunni and Shia coming together, as Matt pointed out. And it is the problem with this is there are so many different buttons that can be pushed that are going to send us off in directions that are beyond the control of anybody in Washington or Tel Aviv or Moscow or wherever. That we could rapidly find ourselves into something that will escalate into a major war, and that, I think, that's where we're headed, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, and I certainly, I mean, I'd like to hope we don't end up there, but I don't see a lot of justification beyond just wishful words. And one of the reasons that you've been kind of mentioning, both of you, kind of around the edges. And the last section we have here, I want to talk about this because I think it's more important than some people realize, and that is the way the English language is being used here, and it has more to do with the book 1984 than anything else. I mean, I showed you that one clip earlier when Netanyahu was talking about peace, as he's ready to push the launch button to blow up part of Beirut and then threaten to go to war against Iran as well. But interestingly enough, this whole talk about anti-Semitism has turned into, instead of something that Israel was a victim of and that they were trying to avoid, now they're using it actually as a weapon against other people. Watch this statement here by Netanyahu at the UN meeting, how he literally attacks the United Nations and everybody listening.
And I say to you, until the Jewish state is treated like other nations, until this anti-Semitic swamp is drained, the UN will be viewed by fair-minded people everywhere as nothing more than a contemptuous farce.
And actually, there was a lot worse he said in there, and something about a cesspool of anti-Semitism and some other stuff like that. I mean, he really excoriated the United Nations as an institution. Basically, everyone who doesn't agree with him is an anti-Semite. Is that true, Matt?
No, that's the game plan. I mean, that's the playbook, and it was effective for years, particularly in the United States. And in the last year, since October 7th, since the massacre of that day, and then the genocide that Israel is perpetuating since, people have been letting that roll off their shoulders. And it's still used. We saw it this past week where two anchors on CNN slandered Rashida Tlaib, saying, untrue things about her, claiming that she opposes the Michigan Attorney General only because the Michigan Attorney General is Jewish. I mean, in clear slander, clear smears, and orchestrated across through other outlets. You also, this is not anything that's new. This has been built upon by decades, right? So the strength of the Israel lobby in the United States is not. It didn't just, as the vice president would say, it didn't just fall out of a coconut tree, right? I mean, this has been built upon decades. So that it gets to the point where you have people say at CNN and New York Times who've never been contacted by AIPAC, but they've been working at the Times or CNN for 10 years, and they just know that they can't cross certain lines. CNN, of course, runs everything it publishes about Israel and Palestine through its people in Jerusalem, who run it through the Israeli censors first. So it just shows you like the type of infrastructure that's set up as well. But, what we're doing here right now, this conversation we're having, by the definitions of the Anti-Defamation League, we are having an anti-Semitic conversation. This is an anti-Semitic event. When you see the numbers around the country of anti-Semitic events and how there are thousands and thousands and thousands, and there are some, don't get me wrong. There is real anti-Semitism out there. But if you are at an event where someone speaks against the genocide, someone who speaks against Israeli policies, speaks for Palestinian liberation and sovereignty, that is classified by the ADL as anti-Semitic. And then, of course, their classifications are what the media and our members of Congress utilize to state what is anti-Semitism. So it's a very effective, well-established tool used to suppress any type of dissent, to color any type of information, and to keep a policy going. And you see how effective it is. Best example being the Congresswoman from New York City, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has been incredibly cowed by it, who is just absolutely pathetic in her performance as a member of the House of Representatives, as a progressive member. And she's been cowed by it because there's not only the bully stick of the labeling them as anti-Semitic and all the consequences that come with that, but also the very real consequences, the tangible consequences of the money of the Israeli lobby that works in tandem. And you saw that with two of her counterparts losing primaries.
Right. Yeah. And Larry, just even on larger, there's so many things where I mean, I've seen Israeli ambassadors and American apologists go on some of the major networks, just say things that are just patently untrue, like in the Hamas situation. No, we're not holding aid back from anybody. In fact, we're getting all the stuff in there as best we can, and then we find out that the U.S.'s own State Department confirmed and validated that they were doing that, and yet you see the Secretary of State said nothing about it, didn't do anything, kept it down, and let the lies go on. How do we have these statements that are such self-evidently untrue, but with such gusto, continue to be said without any kind of censure?
Well, we've been able to lie without suffering consequences of being held accountable for our lies. And so, I mean, and this goes back to, let's call it the start of the global war on terror and the immediate aftermath of the attacks in 9/11 in September of 2001. So there, the United States decided that we could pick people up and incarcerate them without due process, torture them without due process, and hold them indefinitely. Well, who does that sound like? Well, that's what Israel's doing to the Palestinians. But we started doing it to people, always in the name of fighting terrorism, as long as you can use terrorism as an excuse. Then Barack Obama, winner of a Nobel Peace Prize, even though he started wars in Libya and Syria, thought it okay to order a drone strike on an American citizen, killing an American citizen who's a Muslim, who held beliefs that a lot of us don't accept or agree with. But if the word American citizen means anything, it means you do have protections under the Constitution. Obama flushed it away to the cheers of Republicans and Democrats alike. So there are so-called commitment to international-based rules is just about as convenient as used toilet paper. And we trash it, we walk away from it. So, now we're so imbued with these lies that we don't know truth from fiction anymore. And the irony is, when you stand up and try to tell the truth, you're accused of hate speech. You're accused of being a conspiracy theorist.
Or you're just shut down, one or the other.
Yeah.
Last question. I'll give it to each of you to answer in order. We'll start with you, Matt. Is diplomacy dead in the world today? And if not, how can we stop it? Because right now we seem on a train wreck of only military force to accomplish anything.
Yeah, I think it unfortunately is dead. Whether you're looking at this set of circumstances here in the Middle East, what's happening in Eastern Europe, the tension that keeps to develop in East Asia, I think it is dead. I think there are probably successes on the a bilateral level between nations, but in terms of, as you're describing, Danny, diplomacy with a big D, which occurs most spectacularly every year at the UN General Assembly, as we just saw. I mean, you have one speaker after another who just basically said the system's broken. This doesn't work. The UN is a failure. We need to, of course, for years, people have talked about redoing the UN, particularly the UN Security Council. But, you also heard from those in the Middle East. And again, I understand that these guys often, their bark is much louder than their bite, but keep pushing them, and then particularly the pressure from their own people within, and something may occur. And so when you hear Erdogan begin, when you hear Abdullah begin, what you hear, as well as from others, is that we have to take matters in our own hands. And I think that's what you're seeing. And I think what you have coming up with BRICS in particular, this idea that the rest of the world is going to take matters in their own hands, because diplomacy is dead. And the United States, of course, is the one standing there with the bloody knife.
And Larry, let me add a slight amendment to the question for you. Same question, but with this caveat: what does Vladimir Putin conclude if Matt's right and diplomacy is dead? How does that influence what he may or may not do in his war?
That the Americans can't be trusted, that the Americans, there's nobody to talk to in America, in the United States anymore. And let's put China in that ballpark too.
Mhm.
Just the other day, Blinken was lecturing the Chinese on how dare they provide any kind of military support to Russia, who's carrying out all of these atrocities. And the Chinese looked at him and they basically said, "Are you shitting me? Really? You know, you're funneling weapons into Israel. You're funneling weapons into Ukraine. And when you compare the civilian casualties, the Russians, since the start of the special military operation, they've killed on average 320 civilians a month. The Israelis are killing 4,000 civilians a month, a factor of 10. And the United States wants to lecture China, and so Russia's got the same attitude. There's nobody in the West that's trustworthy that can be will keep their word. So, diplomacy's dead as far as the United States is concerned. It's still very active and alive with China, Russia, and the BRICS countries. As we've seen, China and Russia played a critical role in reconciling Saudi Arabia and Iran, for starters. And so the more we see that kind of movement, we're going to see the United States become less and less relevant. And that's really ultimately doesn't serve our national interests in the long run.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't serve anyone's interest. We just talked so many times in the United States about how we've played this a few times. We're back in April. Biden said, "Hey, we're the indispensable nation. We shape events. We don't let events shape us." And yet you see we're literally handcuffed and handed over the power to Benjamin Netanyahu individually. And then we're absent in all these other places other than lectures. And this will not end well for us, fellas. But listen, appreciate you guys coming on today to give us some clarity on these things. And, if anything else, to shine a light on what needs to change and what we can do. And so I appreciate that from both of you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Great. Thanks for having me.
And I appreciate you guys sticking with us on late Saturday night. But like we always do, if there's breaking news, we're going to bring it to you no matter when it is or what's going on there, so you can have the scoop to know what's really going on behind the scenes and the headlines. Also, don't forget, we are now on podcasts. I know a lot of you don't have time to watch everything on video. By all means, go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, virtually anywhere you go for your podcast. Be sure to type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and you will be taken right there. We got a great week for you coming up. We got a lot of good people like we always do, and we will be on top of this issue. Everything it develops, tune in here. Thanks very much, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.